Right then, Peter, we're going to start in a second, just welcoming everyone in.
Sure.
Nice little bit of background you got behind us. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the artwork while we warm up?
Yes, the central picture is the original box cover art of my first real game, which was Populous. And then the images around the outside were done by my wife, who is an artist. And I daren't not put them up on my wall here because she spent so much time on them.
That's the way to do it. Got to show some of that love, haven't we?
Yeah.
Right. We seem to be joined by plenty of participants now, which is excellent. And we're live on YouTube as well, so that we can start with our activity. Wonderful.
Great.
So firstly, I'd just like to say a big hello and welcome to the first event here as part of the PlayUK Russia program.
Right.
I'm Sam from Ukie, the Games Trade Association in the UK, and I'm delighted to be your host and welcome you all here to today's event. Now, before we start, I'm going to do just a little bit of housekeeping. So firstly, the interview today is going to be in English, but we've got an excellent interpreter in the call. So if you want to listen to the Russian language version, you can click on interpretation at the bottom right-hand side of your screen and choose the Russian language. As well as listening to the conversation between our guest and myself, we encourage you to ask plenty of questions. And to do that, simply click on the Q&A section at the bottom, click on the button and ask your question. And I will endeavour to get through as many of those as we possibly can. So on to today's event. This is the first in a series of what we're calling inspirational talks with leading UK games industry professionals. This forms part of the PlayUK Russia programme, which aims to bring together professional games communities in the UK and Russia. This unique programme is being delivered by the Cultural and Education section of the British Embassy in Moscow, the Universal University and Stream School in Moscow, the UK Department for International Trade in Russia, and also Ukie, my organisation. Now, I said we'd be hearing from leading UK games industry professionals, but that's seriously underplaying today's speaker. Peter Molyneux needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him an introduction all the same. Now, Peter Molyneux OBE is one of the most recognisable faces in the global video games industry and is widely considered to be one of the world's most innovative and celebrated games designers. We'll hear today about his time as creative director at Microsoft Games Europe, and also as the founder and CEO of Bullfrog Productions, Lionhead Studios, and 22 Cans. Peter's game CV is unrivaled, with titles such as Populous, Theme Park, Syndicate, Theme Hospital, Dungeon Keeper, Black and White, Fable, and Godus to his name. And of course, there is so much more to come. So welcome, Peter. Now let's start. Start at the start, perhaps at the start in the games industry at least. So
Well, yeah,
how did your career start in games? How did you get into the games industry?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've told this story quite a few times. I mean, I wasn't, I was really awful at school, awful at pretty much everything I did at school. I didn't really pass any exams at all. And if you'd asked anyone at my school, you know, that I would one day go on to be a games designer and get an OBE, everyone would have laughed. And so, but I had this huge passion when I was a kid to have my own business. I don't know why I wanted my own business. I just had this urge to have my own business. So I started up this little company called Taurus. And because by the way, these I can make long answers or short answers. What do you want?
Well, let's start as you would like to talk. And if you're going on too much,
Right.
Peter, I'll step in and tell you. Is that fair enough?
I'm sure you will. So I'd set up this little company called Taurus, mainly because I wanted to, I really liked this girl called Camille, and her dad had encouraged me to set up a business, and I never actually got off with the girl, unfortunately, but I did start the business. And then as part of that, weirdly, it was this tiny little company importing and exporting goods from the UK. And then one day we got this strange phone call from a company called Commodore. And they said, oh, we're making this new machine called the Commodore Amiga, and we'd really love you to come along and have a look at it. They sent a car round, the car picked us up, we were shown around their offices in the factory with this fabulous lunch. Now, I was a nobody, then, and all the time I was thinking, why did they phone me? Why did they phone me? And it wasn't until the end of the day that they said, well, when can we get your products on our Amiga? And I realized that there was another company called Taurus, spelt differently. Ours was spelt Taurus, and theirs was spelt Torus, and they had phoned the wrong company. So I just lied and said, okay, we'll put all our staff, bearing in mind all our staff was me, on your new computer, and we'll get some products up on it in no time. So all these computers arrived from Commodore, and I thought, what the hell am I going to do with them? And then bizarrely, I had a friend who I met down the pub, and he said, oh, you've got some Amigas. Could you convert my little game from the Commodore 64 to the Amiga? I said, sure. And that gave me the sort of foothold into how a game was made. And that was released. I think I got something like £4,000 for doing that. And then after that, I thought, what shall I make with it? And that's where the idea from Populous kind of came from.
So
that got me into the industry.
I mean, this is a bizarre sort of almost serendipitous story, the way these things work through.
So. Yeah, very much so.
Without wanting to age you too much, Peter, I wonder what year was this? What are we talking about here? And I'm quite interested, really, leading up to what was the games industry like in I'm going to say those days. You don't have to put a number on it, but maybe.
Yeah, no, I'll put a number on it. It was the Populous, which was my first real game, came out on I think it was the 15th of March, 1989. And I was 29 at the time. And and the industry back then was completely non-existent. In fact, the next year, I went over to something called the Game Developers Conference, and the entire computer game industry fitted into one room, into the room where we all kind of met. I think there was about 300 people there. I think the last time pre-COVID we had a Games Developers Conference, there was over 60,000 people. So everything has changed radically. Back then in the sort of early 90s, there were no reference book. There was no reference books. There was no middleware. There was no place to meet other people. The hardest thing was trying to persuade people that the games industry was worth them coming into. Whereas now you look at it, we're set up in Guildford here, and Guildford is a bit of a hub for the computer games industry. You can barely go down the supermarket without bumping into some game developer or another.
games created in the pasta aisle. I like that idea.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to Guildford later because I think it's a
Yeah.
really fascinating story, and
Yeah.
you're obviously central to that. Just a quick reminder for all of, there's a lot of love coming to you for in the chat. You'll be pleased to hear. If people have got any questions for Peter, let's put them in the Q&A section, please, so that we can get to those later on. So Peter, you had this vision, but did you always see yourself as a designer? I mean, you talked about setting up a company and running a company. Did you always think you were going to end up as a designer, or did you want everything? What was the plan?
No, I mean, first of all, I was a programmer. And you know, back in the early 90s, there were no such thing as designers. There was programmers, and there were these very famous programmers that were born in the 1980s, and they were proudly independent. They worked alone. They barely used even an artist. And slowly, as we went through the kind of 90s, slowly we started to form ourselves into teams. And that's really, I think, when the games industry first came about, was in the early to mid 90s, where we kind of realized that we didn't think of it as an industry back then, but this hobby that we had was becoming serious business. And we're not talking about a hobby where you make a few pounds. There was millions of pounds being made. And I think it was in the mid 90s, in the kind of early 90s, that the games industry broke through 100 million. It was valued at $100 million. And that was a really big moment, because that's when, bigger corporations started turning their attention to the games industry and saying, this is something with a really big future.
So we're talking about that sort of trajectory, I guess, the way the industry starts to mature a little bit, and then you form a business, you call it Bullfrog, and then you form another one called Lionhead. I'm really interested to hear about the sort of the culture of those studios. What was it like in those studios, and that sort of creativity and excellence? What was the vibe like?
Well, let's start and talk about how politically incorrect it really was.
Okay.
We had an office, after Populous came out, then we had some money, and we started hiring people. That meant we had to get a proper office. Before that, I was in one room of this old woman's flat, which, she had pretty much, every old person problem you could possibly imagine. The screams of her having her hemorrhoids cleaned still haunt me even today. And we had to move into an office, a proper office, and everyone around us in this office had suits and seemed to be, very professional. We were just running around with BB guns, shooting each other with bare feet. We used to have game testers in, and we used to play something called Game Tester Space Invaders, where we used to get these guns and shoot them as they kind of walked in a row. I mean, it's horrendous that you think that we ever did that back then, but it really felt like this was kind of the Wild West of companies. There were no kind of rules back then. But then we slowly realized that we've got to get more talented people, and you can't ask super talented people to go and work in a company that plays Space Invader game testers. That's not going to work. So there was this dawning realization that this was not a hobby. This was a real industry that we had to, hold our heads up high, and we had to be more and more professional. So as we went into the 2000s, and for me, the big moment came when a company called Electronic Arts acquired Bullfrog, and I had to fly over and attend board meetings and executive meetings with this big, enormous company. I couldn't do that barefooted with holding a BB gun, that was for sure.
We'll come back to that sort of difference in culture question later,
Yeah.
which I think could be quite interesting. So thank you for teeing us up for that.
Yeah.
The audience here today there's a lot of creatives there's a lot of game makers, people thinking about their next great big idea. I'm going to pick your brains a little bit about that sort of game concept. So
yeah,
how does that creative process start, and then how does it come to fruition? I mean, it's such a big question, and you could talk for an hour and a half about that. But what are the sort of the key stages? What are the things that make a difference in that process?
Well, now what I'm going to describe now is the way that I work, and it's a very fractured, incredibly expensive way of working, if I'm honest. What would be sensible, wouldn't it, if I sat down in some wonderful kind of Victorian room and had a beautiful desk and wrote down on a piece of paper game idea with sheet after sheet, and then had about a 200-page design document. I gave that to the team and then said, there you go. That would be amazing, wouldn't it? But sadly, that's not the way that I work. Instead, and I'm in the office with people at the moment, and I can see them looking at me sideways already, with slight hatred. Instead, what I do is I say, let's make a game about this. Let's make a game, about, if you took Populous, for example, let's make a game where the player's a god. Or if you took Dungeon Keeper, let's make a game where the player plays the evil guy. And really, that's the start of the idea. And then we spend months and months and months coming up with a prototype that really addresses that idea. And there's a couple of things that I try and resist doing at that stage. The first is to not look at other games, not to say, why don't we do the interface like this? Or why don't we have the control mechanism like Zelda? Or why don't we have the scoring system like Call of Duty? I try not to do that, because I think by doing that, you're restricting yourself and the way that you explore your idea, you're constraining it. And this stage of development, I've got an analogy for you, and this analogy kind of fits best. If you think back to the Victorian age, where in Britain, but many countries in the world, there were these explorers, and they used to go out and they would say, let's see what's in the middle of America. Let's try and find the source of the Victoria Falls. Let's try and walk to the South Pole. They didn't have a map. They just set out with hopefully enough supplies on their back, and every day they woke up in the morning and said, let's go this way. And that's what this development's like. We know our destination. We know the destination is let's make a game about, but how we get to that destination can be very, very different, and can take an extremely long time. The real downside of that is that if you're a programmer or an artist working on a team that is exploring and experimenting, you're never sure when some idiot like me is going to come in and say, that idea you just spent a month on, it doesn't really work anymore. The other downside is that the game can change its whole makeup, its whole DNA, if you like, from the start of the process, where you think you're making one sort of game, to the end of the process when you make another game. And then when you get to the end of that prototype stage, that's when you start to think about laying the design down on paper. But everything up to the end of that stage, it tends to be far, far looser than that. It really doesn't work with a big team.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's for pretty obvious reasons. So in the past, I've done it with small prototype teams, and then grown that small prototype team into a much bigger team. I'm working, and the game I'm working on at the moment is a game called Legacy, and that has gone through so many iterations. It's gone through, we've been developing it now for it'll be 4 years next March, and really, it's only in the last 6 months we found its heart. It's beating heart, and I think of it as a heart. I think of it as something that's living and breathing and so different and unique and original that you can say, yes, we've found the source of the Nile, or we've got to the North Pole, or whatever the analogy is.
I love the analogy in those sort of moments, the great historical moments, perhaps.
Yeah.
It's interesting, the challenges that indie studios have, in particular in finishing games. And it sounds like this constant iteration, this constant prototype, and this constant testing. I mean, that's probably at the heart of some of those issues and challenges. There's always more that can be done.
Yeah.
I guess there comes a point. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. I mean, and another analogy with this Victorian explorer is, you hope you've got enough money in the bank. You hope you've put enough supplies in your backpack, but you're never sure. And for me, every sacrifice is worth taking to chase the dragon of a unique and original game. And sometimes you're working with team members and they just lose heart, because the poor people here, they've been working on this idea called Legacy for the last 4 years, and you can see the excitement slowly drain out of their eyes. But then suddenly you find the game and people start playing the game, and it's all kind of worth it, I think.
That must be an incredible process when you just get to that moment when you think, yep, we've got something here. Now, talking about some of those great games you've made, maybe we'll talk about some of those moments. I'll let you pick one. Do you want to talk for a minute about Populous, one of the themes, or Syndicate? The sort of the origins of some of those games. What are the things that really got them moving? What were the
So with Populous, it all started when I walked into the office. I say office. I walked into the small, tiny room we had, and there was someone there called Glenn Corpus, and Glenn was just playing around with these blocks, and he was putting them together, and they were isometric blocks. So they kind of look, what isometric means, I'm sure everyone knows, but it kind of looks the same sort of scale wherever you are. And I saw those blocks and I said, oh, Glenn, that looks really good. Give me the blocks, I'll play around with them. I did. And I wrote I programmed a routine to turn those blocks into a landscape. In fact, this picture here is the original artwork of the Populous box.
Right.
And then I had this landscape, very crude compared to today, obviously. I had this landscape, and then I thought, wouldn't it be great to have lots of little people on that landscape moving around? So I did that. And then I thought, but what are we going to do with these little people? And I thought, well, it would be great if they navigated around the landscape, if they walked and could stop at the coastline and not go into the water. And that, because I couldn't work out how to do that routine, how to program that routine, because we were talking about computers that were incredibly slow. Nowadays, it would be no problem. I actually thought, well, I'll just click the mouse down and then raise the land if a little person's in the way. And my inadequacy at programming caused the core game mechanic for Populous to come about. Without, if I'd been smarter or cleverer or more experienced, Populous would never have actually existed. And that's what I mean by exploring. You're never sure whether some serendipitous event will spark the heart of the game, or whether it's something to do with long, hard slog.
That's a fascinating process, insight into that process. Thank you. I want to change tack just slightly, if that's okay,
sure.
and have a look at you know, you mentioned Guildford earlier. I'm going to go back to that. Guildford in Surrey, sort of west out of London. How long does it take to get from London to Guildford? What, about 40 minutes?
34 minutes on the fast train.
Why have you always been in Guildford, and what makes it such a special area?
Well, I started in Guildford because a friend of mine said, "Oh, I've got a room that you can use as your office," when I first started out in my first company. And so he said, "You can use it for free." And that happened to be over a shop called PJ Hi-Fi. And this hi-fi shop, I don't think they even knew we were upstairs. But that caused me to have my first office in Guildford. And ever since then, and this is back in 1985, I think, ever since then, to move away from Guildford is extremely hard because everyone puts down their roots. And then when we were pretty much the only computer games company in Guildford. I think there was one other, but we were pretty much the only one. But then when Electronic Arts acquired Bullfrog, they decided to set up one of their head offices in Guildford. And that, you know, doubled or tripled or quadrupled the size of developers in Guildford. And then whenever a company gets acquired, this kind of strange, it has a strange effect on the people that are working for the company. Some of those people think, I don't want to work for a big corporation. I'm going to leave and set up my own little business. And that's what happened to a lot of people in Guildford. There were a lot of little startups from the Guildford, from the Bullfrog being acquired by Electronic Arts days. And then, you know, they all grow and they get acquired and the same thing happens. So now I don't know the exact numbers, that there must be over 100 computer games companies in the Guildford area, I would have thought. You're on mute.
There are, yes. Sorry about that. I was such a fascinating question as well. I can't believe it. There's lots of other games clusters around the UK, obviously, and that story of one larger studio breaking up and making lots of small ones is it's a well-trodden route for other parts of the UK. Looking more broadly, the UK itself is a well-known, well-established creative centre for development studios, in particular in the UK. There was some analysis done a couple of months ago saying that something like 40 out of the leading 120 studios globally were in the UK, which is an amazing sort of stat. Why is the UK so good? We're biased, obviously, or is it good?
Yeah,
is
of course
it good,
we're
and why
biased.
is it good?
Yeah. Well, I've thought about this so much over the years, and often been asked this question, and I've never really had a succinct answer. You know, if it's because we put fluoride in the water, I think that would be a great answer, but it's not that. I think it's that the British have a slightly different approach to risk. You know, Americans or Japanese or Chinese people, they have, you know, a very well-formed professional approach to risk. You know, they'll do a lot of risk management, and if they're setting up a company, they'll do a lot of, a lot of preparation for that. Where we, the British people, we're kind of a nation of digital shopkeepers, if you like. And we just say, let's just start a company and see what happens. And I think it's that approach which means that when we're setting a company up, when we're thinking of the game idea, when we're pulling a team together, we're far, far less worried about whether the money's going to run out or whether we're professionally set up. And that means we focus far more on what's, in my opinion, the real important matter is, and that is the quality and the uniqueness of the game that you're working on. But if you ever find out the reason, if there's some DNA in us, I'd love to know.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many different possible answers to that question, but it's great to hear your personal view on it. I don't know if you know anything about the Russian games industry. Have you had many dealings with the Russian games industry? I wondered if you've got any, not exactly advice, but let's say, that this event is all about connecting, bringing people together for mutual opportunity and collaboration. How can and Russia's not a fledgling games market, it's a well established with some amazing developers. How does a country like that sort of grow its global image and footprint? Any ideas on that?
What is it? Everything really ultimately comes back to the game itself. Now, I know of a lot of, and I have dealt with quite a lot of Russian game developers. A lot of them are more on the work to hire side. And work to hire is it's a fantastic way to grow your company. It's I've seen many companies start off work to hire and then transform themselves into a company that works on unique games. And when I think of Russia, I tend to think of more work for hire studios than I do thinking of unique studios. Now, I know there are some very noticeable exceptions. I should know them off the top of my head, but I actually don't. And what I would say to anyone setting out, whether they're in an existing company or whether they're in the thinking of setting up, is think of, go back to that thinking of an idea, but don't think I'm gonna do this idea because it's number one in the charts. I'm going to do this idea because IMDb gave it, or Metacritic gave it 90%. I think that's where the mistake is made. And there's two reasons why I think that's a mistake. The first is, well, there's probably hundreds of other people doing exactly the same as you'll be doing and thinking, well, I'm going to do the same sort of game. That's your first mistake. And so ultimately, if you want your game published by a publisher, which is not quite so important these days, but if you wanted a game published by a publisher, you're going to walk in the door and they're probably going to be thinking, oh God, not another one of these games. And the second thing to say is that although it seems so much safer to be able to forecast based upon, my game is like, if you said, well, I'm making a game like Zelda Breath of the Wild, well, you could probably get your calculator out and say, well, that's sold 20 million copies, 20 million times 40 euros, I'm rich. But that's another mistake, because it's almost impossible to make any game. It's almost utterly impossible to make a truly great game, and it takes such polish and refinement. But those two reasons shouldn't be reasons why you don't start on an original idea. And the crucial starting point is you or your team. You've got to be so excited about the idea. You've got to be thinking, I can't wait to play this idea. I can't wait to feel the game, because it's only that excitement. If you're working on an original game, it's only that excitement that's going to drive you through the tough times. Have confidence in your idea. If your idea makes you excited and makes the team you're working with really excited, then have confidence in it. Take those first daring steps to explore unique idea. And you know what? There are so many rich, incredible avenues for ideas still completely untaken. I mean, for me, there hasn't been a game really that has used AI or used connecting people together in unique and original games. There hasn't been the blossoming of those ideas, and I think there's a huge amount of possibilities out there. If you're going to do a game like, say, a battle royale game, then you shouldn't think, well, I'm going to have a better battle royale game than everyone else. That's not the problem that you've got to solve. The problem that you've got to think to yourself, if you want to do a battle royale game, how am I going to evolve that genre? How am I going to show the fans of that genre things that they've never even imagined or dreamt of before? If you're going to make a first-person shooter, I mean, who would dare go up against Activision in first-person shooters? You've got to really think, right, I'm going to turn this on its head. I'm going to introduce something, or way of playing, or an interface, or a thematic approach which hasn't been seen before, and that sort of unique way of thinking is the way to get through it. Now, all this advice is just secondary to if you had someone come in and say, if you want to make your own games, choose a genre, choose a really successful genre, and just make one of those games, because the balance sheet of the early part of that idea will always look more interesting than doing an experimental approach. Did that make sense? I think.
Well, you turned a rather bland question into something quite inspirational. So thank you for doing that. That was brilliant. Thank you. Actually, there's quite a few questions coming in from the audience. They're often around this next theme. So I'm gonna take you back to your journey, if that's okay.
Sure.
Lionhead acquired by Microsoft Games Europe, and I'm interested to hear how that changed. I mean, you've told us you're getting on planes and going to meetings, and perhaps there's a certain maturing of the business there and a maturing of the approach. But how does the role change when you're working for a corporation compared to working for an indie studio that you own? How does that change?
Well, it's the most radical change you could possibly imagine. And if I'm completely honest, I'm going to be completely honest with you of why that change, particularly the Bullfrog acquisition, was so, life-changing. The first thing is that the way that I love to develop is I love to hunker down. I love to keep, my team as close as possible, to close the doors, pull down the blinds, and to do everything and experiment with anything. And then, kind of, ta-da, here's what we've been working on. But of course, if you're working in a corporate world, that's not the way corporations work. They want to say, very sensible, logical, smart questions. How long is the project going to take? Don't know. How much is it going to cost? Don't know. When are you going to have a demo? Don't know. And they want to turn all those don't knows into, right, give us the time. It doesn't matter what the time is. So scheduling and corporate responsibility or corporate reporting is a really big change. The other element, which for me was pretty cataclysmic, is I'm the sort of human being that really likes to focus on one thing. And when there's lots going on at Electronic Arts, there's lots to focus on. So for me, in the early days of the acquisition, it took my focus away. I wasn't, sitting down every day and coding for 16 hours a day. I was lucky to get a couple of hours, and rather than, spending months and months just developing and coding, I was flying out to America, once a month for a week. And that means that my relationship with the team, my relationship with the games that I was working on, and, my relationship with Electronic Arts were all very, very different. And for me, very, very uncomfortable, if I'm honest.
Mm.
It was uncomfortable because, I wanted to do well in electronic arts, and I wanted them electronic arts. Well, I'll tell you something. As soon as electronic arts acquired us, I spoke to the team. We were about 40 people back then, and I said, you know what? We want to be the best studio in electronic arts. We wanted to make the greatest games in electronic arts, and putting that flag out there and making that an objective in itself sounds really sensible, but actually it kind of took a little bit away from the previous line was, let's make the best games. So for me, in the first year of the acquisition, I was flying all over the place and getting very distracted. But in the end, I had to say, look, I've got to stop this. I took the team away from the office, from the Electronic Arts headquarters office, and we went to my house into a tiny little room, and we rewrote the whole entirety of Dungeon Keeper. We did the same with Theme Park, just so I could get that old culture of focus and concentration and immersion back to try and finish those games.
That's interesting. And yet during this period, some of what people would regard as some of your best games came out.
Yeah,
Black
yeah,
and White and Fable.
Yeah.
So you've got that
well,
interesting.
No, Black and White was after I left Electronic Arts, and Fable, because when I left Electronic Arts and set up Lionhead, and that made Black and White and the Fable series, and but especially Black and White, because Black and White was just a nightmare of development. But that was, very old school, getting a great team together and getting them to utterly focus on that idea and not to and then with no other distractions.
There was a question from the audience from Serge saying, well, how many people were involved in making these games? You just mentioned 40 people going away for a little retreat. Yeah. What kind of numbers are we talking about in making Dungeon Keeper, Black and White? What are we talking about?
In the early days, we were talking about teams of, 4, 5, 6, 7, or a couple of artists, a couple of coders. And then as we grew and went from, Populous was just me and this guy called Glenn Corpus. A Syndicate, Powermonger was about 5 people. Syndicate was about 6 people. So slowly it was increasing. And then when we broke through 20 people, that's when it became particularly challenging. But, Theme Park, for example, that was me and the artists and a chap called Demis. We worked on Theme Park together. So that was a very small team again. And the Dungeon Keeper team got really big, and then it scaled back down to about 7 people. But in Black and White days, that was about 35, 40 people. And then Fable, it was hundreds.
Yeah. There's a large number of questions asking, are we ever going to see another Black and White? What do you think?
I'd love to do another Black and White. I'd love to do it. But, the Black and White, the IP is owned by Microsoft now, and I don't know whether Black and White feels like a Microsoft sort of game. I don't know why I say that, but I just don't know. But I would love to. I'd love to do another Black and White. If I had to rank the games that I'd love to do again, I'd love to do now. I would love to do a different take on the Fable universe, because I think there was something just fabulous about the kind of world that was created. I'd love to update the gameplay completely based upon all the AI research that is so far more advanced than when we did Electronic Arts. And I'd love to do another Dungeon Keeper, because I think it was something about being evil that just really sung to me.
Well, I mean, they're I'm not going to compare them to your children, because I don't know anything about your children, but
Right.
the games that you've produced are clearly, they're labors of love for you. Can I
Yeah,
ask you
very
what your
much so.
favorite one is that you worked on, or is that an impossible question?
A very difficult question. It's like choosing a favorite child. I mean, probably the sense of accomplishment of making Black and White was like nothing. I mean, Black and White was incredibly challenging to make. One, because of the technology, but also because it was the first real game where the press and the community and the fans became a real force in development. And it changed the way we felt about development. And there were so many bizarre things that happened. We had people from different countries camping literally outside the office waiting for us to finish the game. It was just bizarre sequence of things. So, and it was a fabulous team. It really was.
This is like rock star status, Peter. You don't see that in games very often.
It was very, very odd. You've got to remember, when I started talking to you today, at my heart is this real belief that I am pretty rubbish at everything I've done, because that was drilled into me as a school kid. And a lot of what I've done is to kind of, psychologically speaking, prove that they were wrong back in my school days. And it sounds bizarre, but that is a huge motivator in my life, is to prove that wrong. And I must also say, and I have to remember to say this every time I open my mouth, is, I'm just the guy that says, let's do a game about this. And the brilliant people, the genius people I've worked with are the real, they've made the real difference.
Well, let's talk about geniuses. If we look at games that other people have made, I mean, you can either tell me a little bit about some games that you absolutely love that other people have made, or are there any games out there that you think, you know what, I would have loved to have been in that team that was making that game?
I mean, I think the obvious. Let's take the obvious ones to start with. Let's talk about GTA and Breath of the Wild. Those are, both of those games are such realized worlds. They're such incredibly fulfilled and realized worlds that just fit and blend together superbly. I mean, the way that Grand Theft Auto did it, obviously before Zelda Breath of the Wild, it's still takes my breath away. Just driving through the streets of Los Angeles and the freedom which it gives you is just incredible. The same sort of feel in Breath of the Wild, but what Nintendo did so incredibly well is to stitch everything together and make that freedom even more compulsive than something like Grand Theft Auto. So for me, those two games, they're incredible experiences. But then you're never sure when you're going to stumble on a game which is going to kind of take your breath away and make you think that you haven't seen everything. And the one that I played recently, it's nothing particularly original. Well, there is something original about it, actually. And that's a rogue, a dungeon rogue crawler called Hades. And you just go through this dungeon and you replay it over and over and over again. And I wouldn't normally appeal to me, that this game wouldn't appeal to me. but the story and the narrative, it's just breathtaking, absolutely breathtaking. And the way that it weaves you through this very repetitive gameplay and drives you, motivates you to go forward is unbelievably breathtaking. And then more recently, I have been playing a bit of Baldur's Gate 3, which is, a great role playing game. And you're never sure what else you're going to see.
Do you ever play a game and think you're quite jealous that someone else has made a game that good, that they've come up with an idea that you would like to, or you're more appreciative of what the creative process has done with these other games?
I think you have to be envious as a designer. I think you do. You have. It's not so much the ideas in the game or even the way that they're blended together. It's the fact that they have achieved that as a whole. The game, all three games that I mentioned in my examples are just breathtaking games. Of course, you can always give yourself the excuse, can't you, that they had unlimited money. It cost 400 million to make. It had a team of 500 people, but at the back of your mind, there's a little voice that's kind of whispering in your ear and saying, "Well, maybe I should, maybe I should try and do an open world game. Maybe you should try a dungeon crawler and or something like a dungeon crawler." So if I'm honest, there is a bit of jealousy. Why wouldn't you? You can't be a competitive person and without jealousy. Absolutely not.
Well, maybe let's look at that question as a slightly different way then. So, are there people, ideally in the games industry, but not necessarily, but who are the people that inspire you?
Who are the people that inspire me?
We can come back to this later. You can think about it.
That has changed as the industry has changed. I mean, the first person that I worshipped was someone called Will Wright, who did SimCity and the Sims. And worshipped is the right way of putting it, because if you ever met Will, which I was lucky enough to do on numerous occasions, you just felt you are in the existence of someone who just is 10 times smarter than you are, and just seems to know how the universe fits together. And then the people that I've worked with in the past those are the people that really have inspired me, the people I've actually sat down and worked with. And I suppose the top of that pile is someone called Demis Hassabis, who I worked with on Theme Park and then has gone on to found and grow one, if not the most important AI company in the world. And just his incredible, brilliant mind, a beautiful and brilliant mind, an incredible drive, is like nothing that I've ever witnessed before. And then there are a lot of other people that I've worked with, which you wouldn't know, which really, really have inspired me, and they've forced me to be smarter. I have to be smarter to be able to stay in contact with these people.
That's really interesting. And I wonder, are there people in the games industry that you would like to meet that you've never met? I know people call it a bucket list. That always sounds a little bit doom and gloom to me. But the sort of the idea is, there's someone out there you thought, what? I'd really like to meet that person. You've just not managed to do it yet.
Well, there's meet and meet, isn't there? I mean, there's meet and shake someone's hand. And, I've met Miyamoto a lot of times and shaken his hand and, even had a coffee with him. but I've never really had a conversation, and I would love to have a conversation with him about it. I'd love to know what his approach is, how he's dealt with the way that the industry has grown. So I'd love to meet. I'd love to spend some more time. And there are some Chinese and Japanese developers whose names I wouldn't dare to attempt to pronounce now, which I would also love. But it's not just meeting; it's that in-depth conversation. It's a dinner rather than a coffee. Or it's spending hours, not minutes, with someone.
That's quite that's epitomized often in the games industry, isn't it? We're a very sociable bunch. We like to go meet people. Sure, there's too much of that just handshake 2-minute conversation. I love the idea of having a behind closed doors in-depth conversation with someone. It'd be amazing. Amazing. Well, you're giving us your time today, so thank you for leading the way on that.
No, it's my pleasure.
I'm really interested in the sort of the change, bringing it a little bit more up to date. If we look at what you're doing at 22 Cans, and I think by your own admission, you would say you're in that casual game space with things like Curiosity. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what's the thought process for moving into that area? And secondly, as a follow-up, so why? And then how does that make you think about sort of design and content of games that surely has to change dramatically along that way?
Well, for me, 22 Cans was born the moment I saw Steve Jobs stand on stage and flick his finger on that iPhone screen.
Right.
And that, at the time I was working at Microsoft, and an incredibly good job, and I was working with the Fable team, which was fantastic. But for me, seeing that flick changed everything. And the reason it did is I realized that, firstly, people could touch these worlds. They wouldn't have that distance that a controller and a mouse gives. That's the first thing. And secondly, I realized is these devices are going to be in everyone's pocket. Everyone is going to have access to gaming. And that was such an incredibly exciting concept. I could design a game for not millions of people, but hundreds of millions of people. And I could bring a uniqueness and originality to those games and give people things that they hadn't seen before. Actually, if I'm honest about it, it's been a lot harder of a transition going from developing console games and PC games. It's been a lot harder transition than I ever thought it would. And the reason for that is because the narrative or the arc of the game itself is utterly different. The arc of, if you take a Fable game, Fable, there was probably about 40 to 60 hours of gameplay in a Fable game. And the game had a start, it had a middle, it had an end, it had a narrative arc. But games that you make for mobile, because people who play those games, what they really honestly want isn't a game. No, they want more than that. They want a digital hobby. They want an experience that every day they can lose themselves in and immerse themselves in and let the world's problems just fade away when they're involved in that game. And that's what I want to make, man. Is I want to make that hobby that just stays with them for years. Well, why do we say decades? Because for me, I'd love to go on and make another Fable or another Black and White or another Dungeon Keeper. I'd love it. I would adore it. but I've been so lucky in my life. It feels right for me to do the tough things, to do the hard things, not the easy things, the hard things. And so it's taken a long time for me to get my head into that space. And, I practiced on a game called Godus, and I practiced on a game called A Trail. And now I'm making Legacy, which has been, a really challenging experience. And hopefully there's going to be something this year that we'll be talking about on Legacy. Maybe not. And, it's certainly not going to be the game you would expect it to be. But, that's why I made the leap. Is I guess it's me being that kind of kid again. When you release a game, there's this wonderful, amazing, incredible moment when you're never quite sure when you're going to get it. And that's when you see someone playing the game that you made. And it's almost a sexual excitement. It's this fire, this giggle that builds up inside you. And just imagine doing that on a game that's been played by tens of millions, hundreds of millions. I mean, Jesus, that's what we're talking about. So that was the reason why. Did that make sense, or was it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, a couple of things that jump out at me. You're almost talking about sort of retraining and rethinking everything from scratch, which is amazing concept. You think of someone with such a good pedigree, let's be honest, having to sort of retrain and think from scratch, and probably recruiting totally new people to work around you that can think differently. It just shows how the games industry is constantly moving. We're never sitting still. It's fascinating.
No,
fascinating. I wonder if you think you almost make it sound like you've sort of gone full circle and you've come back to some of your original roots and way of working with 22 cans. Is that safe to say that you've kind of gone full circle? And what are the things that the key things you've learned on that way, if that is the journey that you've taken?
Well, it is full circle, actually, because one of the things that I've really stopped doing is press, because the press started to totally become the center of my existence rather than something which was there so I could show what I did rather than becoming the center of it. So stopping press has given me the time to do the thing which I needed to do, and that was to program again, to code again. In the latter days of, I did a lot of coding on black and white, but I had to let that skill wither in Fable because it was just too many people to look after, and there's too many ideas and too many things happening to be able to code. It takes an awfully long time. So I've actually gone back full circle. It feels more like the early days of Bullfrog than it ever did before. I'm coding. I am a total obsessive coder. I mean, I'm not proud of this, but I work insanely long hours. Insane. I'll start work at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'll never finish before 10 o'clock at night. And that's, well, for the last week or so, it's been 7 days a week. Fortunately, my son now works with me in the office, so I get to see my family.
Not the same across a keyboard, though, is it, Peter? Let's be honest.
Well, listen, he takes the affection that I give him, and if it's via Slack, that's good enough for me. And he's 18 now, so he's into everything. So you're right. It is full circle. It feels full circle. The only thing that it isn't full circle is that I can't quite be as abusive to my body as I was back in the late 80s. I can't just eat pizza and drink Coke and never exercise. Now I've got to, you've got to take care of yourself.
It's interesting. So these are the life lessons that you've learned. You're still manic, getting involved at every single step, and
Absolutely.
you've
I
got to look
mean,
after yourself. Yeah, yeah.
you, there is nothing like, I mean, yesterday, I'll give an example. Yesterday, it was, it was sunny outside. I live in a beautiful, amazing house. I mean, I'm so, so, so lucky. And, it probably all the trees were turning bronze and golden. The dogs were out in the garden. And what I should have done, I should have taken the dogs for a walk, and but I was glued to my keyboard. I was working on this routine. I was just getting one little thing working, and it was a fantastic day for me. And okay, I didn't walk through the beautiful falling leaves in the garden, but for me, I climbed a mini Mount Everest. That's what it felt like.
It's interesting. We're talking about the things that sort of inspire us and motivate us. For a lot of
Mm,
people, it is going out into the world and seeing things and experiencing. It sounds
yeah.
like you're inspired more by other things. What are the things that really get you to these peaks then?
Um, you're never sure when inspiration is going to come. I mean, you could
Mm,
be watching TV, you could be listening to music, you could be, and fortunately, I've tried to stop doing this. You could be talking to your wife, which is always the one that gets me in most trouble when, she's talking away and talking about some very interesting thing, and I glass over and go, yes, I've got it. And that's when she walks out of the room and dismisses me. So you're never quite sure when inspiration comes. I'm an enormous believer in setting your, and this is going to sound a bit science fiction-y, but I think one day it'll be proven, is that if you, just before you go to sleep, you think about a problem that you've got, especially a design and a creative problem, the number of times that I've fallen to sleep thinking through that problem and then woken up first thing in the morning thinking, yes, I've got it. And for me, that's a lot of, giving your brain the space to create without all the distractions of media and images is an important moment about inspiration, I think.
yeah, it's really interesting that do you step back or do you just engross yourself in it? Really different approaches.
Yeah,
We've actually got some questions.
sure.
Before I've got a few questions to end on, looking at sort of the future for you, future for the industry, those kinds of
Yeah.
things. We've got a couple of quite particular questions here. So, do you use your own proprietary engine, or do you use Unity, Unreal? What's your engine of
Yeah.
choice?
Fantastic believer in middleware. I think it
Mm,
allows you to get to the heart of your idea far faster, but we do use Unity, but it's a highly modified Unity because, again, you don't want the constraints of your middleware to affect your game design too much. So sometimes, and there's two warning things here. Sometimes it's really great to work on tools and to modify the core engine, the core technology and middleware that you've got to enable your creativity. But beware, if you find yourself creating tool after tool after tool, because you don't want to face the thing that you don't know how to create, which is the game idea itself, I've seen that happen to an awful lot of people. So it's Unity. I have used Unreal in the past. I'm a great fan of both Unreal and Unity. I think.
And what about languages in
done
terms
well.
of programming languages when you're coding? What's the
Yeah.
one of choice, or is there no such thing?
It's C sharp. I don't like losing my C++ because it feels so much closer to raw nature of coding. But C sharp definitely takes a lot of the fussiness away from coding. I mean, it's only recently that it's been C sharp. prior to that, it was C++, and then prior to that, it was an assembler. So, it's a variety.
And what about for someone that's I won't say seen it all, because that suggests it's come to an end.
Yeah.
You've seen a lot of it, and there's a lot more to be seen. What about if we think about our audiences? Often young people they're in their first job maybe, or they're trying to get into the games industry. Have you got any sort of guidance or advice on how on earth can you get into this industry in whatever position?
I think the biggest correlation between someone starting out and then becoming successful is curiosity.
Okay.
It's not that hard. You still have, it's quite an effort, but it's not that hard to get work experience in a company. It's not even particularly hard to get an internship, for example, in a company. And we offer internships all the time. But if you've got one of those internships or you've got work experience in a company, for goodness sake, be curious when you get there. Be curious and fascinated. Don't try and say, oh, I've got a great idea for a role-playing game. It's brilliant. You should do that. That's not going to impress anybody. What you want to be is curious about how people work, how people think, what they do and what motivates them. So what you really want to say in those early days when you're at a company, you do want to say a small number of very impactful things. And if you, for example, are going to start as a game tester, it's really tempting to write down as a game tester. And I have many game testers that have done this. This game is shit. I hate it. That's not going to impress anyone, and you're not going to get any further. What you should do if you're a game tester is think down, okay, I can write up all these bugs. I can write all these bugs up and I can be precise and exact about the bugs. Brilliant. That's fantastic. You'll get a lot of appreciation for that. But if you just said one idea, why don't you try this? Why do you try, if you're talking about the control, why don't you try increasing the lag between changing directions by a small percent? What you want to be is very insightful and very precise about a tiny little bit. And if you can do that, if you can be curious, if you can be excited, if you can be positive, I think your future in the games industry would be incredibly good. What you can't do is sit there and wait to be discovered, because it'll never happen.
Yeah, great advice. Get out there and make it happen. There's a lot of your fans here want to know how they can. It sounds like they want to track you down and have a chat with you, Peter. Is there a sort of a general, I want to communicate with Peter or send him a message? How do people do that?
They can email me directly on.
I'm not going to give your email. Are you sure you want to give your email address out?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. It's a complete honor to be able to communicate and chat with people, and I've done it many, many times and ended up benefiting far, far more than the person that reached out. So it's P Molyneux, PMOLYNEUX @22cans.com. But I am crap at doing any of that stuff. So today I cleared down my emails, and it was about 1,000 emails that I cleared down. The last time I did it was back in October. So Don't hold your breath. Don't think I'm going to instant message you back immediately. But I'm also on LinkedIn. By all means, send me a message on LinkedIn or email me directly. That's absolutely fine. I've had some great conversations there.
Internships is great advice, actually, just getting that sort of practical work experience.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Do 22 Cans offer any internships?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, Bullfrog, Lionhead, and 22 Cans offer internships, and they can be anything from a day to 6 months, or if you're a university student, we'll try and grab as much time as we possibly can from you, and we try and get people working on things from day one. There's nothing worse, I think, than an internship when you come in and you just sit around and you think, what am I supposed to be doing? There's nothing worse than that. Absolutely love interns to come in.
Yeah, well, the hours that you keep, you'll be expecting long hours from these people.
No. I've got to say now, one of the other things that I'm proud about with 22 Cans is that we do, everything we do without crunching at all. Okay. So I choose to work that late. I never, in fact, I insist that people go home at 6 o'clock for two reasons. One is we shouldn't be eating into people's lives by that much, but also, I just enjoy the peace, man.
Well, I've got two more questions for you, if that's okay, in this last 5 or 6 minutes. So we've very much focused on looking back here. This is your chance to tell us about what you're going to be doing in the future. Anything that you can share. You've given us a hint about legacy anyway, but what are you going to be doing in the future? And then finally, where do you think the games industry is going? It's such a big question, but there might be a couple of things you want to focus on.
Well, for me, I just want to continue doing what I'm doing, for as long as I feel like I can make a difference or, be impactful or be positive to the future. I love having that idea, and I love seeing that idea grow and evolve and change. And, I'm totally addicted to that. And I'm sure I'll be doing that till the day I die. I'm incredibly proud of what we're doing on Legacy. The game has completely changed around, and what I'm hoping is that it is going to be like nothing that people have ever seen before. It's going to, that's why it's called Legacy. It's called Legacy because I want it to be just breathtaking in its scope and just fearless in in the way it runs roughshod over every cornerstone of design and comes up with something which is, completely and utterly different. Now, as far as the games industry is concerned, the games industry has always gone in these cycles where sometimes everything we do is unique and different, and we become obsessive as an industry about certain genres, and some genres have withered a bit, and they're going to be coming back into the limelight again. And I'm sure those cycles will go on. But I have to throw down a bit of a gauntlet to the games industry, because I don't think we're like any maturing industry. We're not the young kids on the block anymore. We in the early noughties and the 1990s, we kind of felt like the punk of the corporate world. We were kind of fearless. We were growing massively, and we were fearless in the adoption of our new technology. And I think that fearless, wanderlust spirit, we are losing it a bit now. And what we've got to do, even though it takes an awful lot, we've got to embrace some of the new technologies that are coming out. And I'm going to cite back on AI again. So many exciting things are happening in the area of AI. I feel that the games industry should embrace that and to be inspired by that. And the next is the connecting people together. I know we've had first-person shooters that have been doing it for an awfully long time, but I'm not talking about connecting in the conventional, say, I'm not talking about gamer to gamer. I'm talking about creating worlds which connect people in very unique ways together. So I'd love to see more of that. Obviously, we've got the hardware issues with AR and VR, but until those form factors are really sorted out, I think we're going to see those to be a little bit more niche, if you like. That's my view, for what it's worth.
So we think you're on the cusp of something even more exciting. That's fabulous.
Yeah.
And thank you for telling us and sharing us with us some details about your new product as well. You've got everyone quite excited on the chat about that. So
right.
Excellent stuff. I suppose the final thought, is there anything that you want to share with our audience? Anything I've not asked you that you thought I should have asked you, Peter?
One is, I always feel incredibly honored that people want to listen to me rambling on about stuff. So I really want to thank everybody for listening. And if I've done anything, it's to try and inspire you to be great, because you can do it. You can be great, and being great is what this games industry needs. It needs great Europeans, great Russians, great Americans to come together to create the next series of genres and whole new breathtaking titles that appeal to the world, because that's what, truly what the heart of greatness is.
That's an amazing positive note to end on. Thank you very much. At this point, obviously, the crowd would erupt into rapturous applause. It's slightly different in this virtual world.
Is,
You'll just have to accept. I can hear them in the background. I can sense this is happening. Right. Okay. So, you've been, as ever, exceptionally generous with your time and your insights. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. And for our audience, I want to thank you for also joining us here this evening. And please feel free to come back next week. We're doing this for the next 4 weeks with a series of other industry leaders. Next week, we're going to have Tim Woodley from Hello Games. We're going to try and find out a little bit more information about what he's been up to and where No Man's Sky is going. So that'll be exciting next week. To find out more about the PlayUK Russia activities, go to the British Council website for more information. Sign up for more events. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you finally, Peter. Good luck, everyone, and be safe.
Goodbye. Good luck, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you, Sasha. Was that okay? Wonderful. Thank you very much for your support. See you next week. Bye.